Well, for more on efforts to combat wildfires, I'm joined by Chief Gary Ludwig. Gary is Fire Chief at the Champaign, Illinois Fire Department. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, as an experienced firefighter, what happens when you first hit the ground in these situations?
Well, these fires are so large that you just have to come in with massive forces. The California Division of Forestry, which is responsible for all the firefighting in California, they're a large firefighting contingent, and they have a mass force of operation that they can not only bring in those types of resources, but they can also pull additional resources from other states. And the goal, obviously, is containment and an extinguishment of the fire.
So then you also have people, you have power lines, you have a lot of different threats. What are the top priorities in order to try and limit the fatalities and destruction?
Well, one of the goals, as I said before, is containment. They will use various tactics and strategies, wind direction. They will try to create some type of mitigation area where they're actually cutting swaths to keep the fire from spreading. But when you have some of the high winds that you have in California, anywhere from 18 to 20 to 30 miles per hour, it's tough to cut those fires off and keep them from spreading. So the devastation alone in itself is unique in the fact that not only is the forestry and the wildland, but it's also the urban interface where we have more and more migration of homes into those urban interfaces and those wildlands.
And as we understand, some people had just barely minutes to kind of get away and pack up. So for people who aren't sure where to turn for help, what sort of resources are available to them and those potentially in the path of these wildfires?
Well, obviously, we always try to advocate one of the things you should do is contact your relatives if they're outside the area. Always shelter with your relatives. One of the things that we strongly discourage is try to shelter in place, try to fight the fire yourself. Unfortunately, we have people that try to do that, and the end result is sometimes very disastrous. A lot of people will mitigate their homes. They'll remove shrubbery a good distance from their homes. They'll have clay roofs instead of some type of shingle roofs. They'll try to mitigate the damage to their home. I've seen homes, the whole subdivisions wiped out, and you'll have one or two homes that are still remaining in that subdivision because they've done that mitigation. But it's important that you not shelter in place and that you leave the area when those evacuation notices are issued by the local authorities.
So what are some of the main ways that this sort of devastation affects an entire community and its economy?
Well, it is devastating to a local economy. If you look at the California Division of Forestry, again, they're the firefighting force there in California that handles this. Their budget each year right now is about $420 million. Well, in this first month alone, they spent about $120 million of that already. So in 1 month, they've already used up 25% of their firefighting budget. So that's just the impact on the government itself in California. Then you have to talk about the impact to what is actually the 5th largest economy in the world, which is California. Their economy is about $2.7 trillion. Now, thankfully, a lot of that economy is in the technology areas, and those technology components and those technology companies are not really in the affected areas. They're not in the wildland interfaces. What's really in the wildland interfaces is the communities where the homes are at and where the businesses are at, and that's where the economic impact really occurs.
Now, unfortunately, these wildfires are becoming an all too familiar sight, especially in California. So what's your assessment in terms of the level of preparedness as well as the funding for battling these wildfires?
Well, obviously, the funding has to be there because we have to contain these fires. And so one of the issues that you try to do is not only the response of what we see right now, but in the off season, they try to do mitigation. You try to remove the fuel that is found in these forests and these wildland interfaces. We try to do the mitigation that I talked about, where you remove shrubbery and you remove forests and you remove the fuel away from the residences and away from the structures. You try to cut them back. So those are things that you try to do to limit the mitigation, or I'm sorry, limit the damage. But unfortunately, when the winds kick up like they do and you have this tremendous heat and low humidity, those are the impacts that we see. In fact, you had a unique situation where you had a fire tornado right outside Redding, California, and it actually looks like a tornado if you actually see the video itself, and that's the result of the the heated air rising so rapidly that the other air is rushing right in and causing this fire tornado.
Goodness. Well, thank you so much for your insights. Fire Chief Gary Ludwig of the Champaign, Illinois Fire Department.